Our next speaker, our speakers, is Jane Hall and Audrey Thomas-Hayes from Assemble, London. Assemble is in some ways an emblematic practice in its shift as to how design and designers can engage with the city. There's a journey that many of you architects will kind of know and be familiar with, where you graduate and then you become a small part in a big practice, and then eventually you start your own small practice and you do a little project and a bigger project, and eventually you become a big practice. It's a professional journey that has a number of recognizable features, established hierarchies and accepting standard contracting conditions and working out who the boss is. Assemble, in some ways, obeys very few of those kind of expectations. It's a group of 17 individuals. They have a dead flat management structure. The group often self-instigates its own projects that have, at best, a porous disciplinary kind of boundary. No one and everyone is in charge in a manner that resists the historical cliche of the lone genius. It's a force of experimental and sometimes even, they would admit, opportunistic nature that has seen it catch the attention of the world within only a few years of its inception. The group works across the fields of art, architecture, and design, and they were the unexpected winners of the 2015 Turner Prize, Europe's most prestigious contemporary art prize, for their ongoing project in Toxteth, a part of Liverpool called Granby Four Streets is the project. They're known for a hands-on use of reconstituted materials, as well as overlooked locations. Recent and current projects from Assemble include the transformation of a series of, you might say, found, historic, listed, and infrastructural spaces, as well as a new project, a new public art gallery for Goldsmiths University, due to be completed later this year. So we're pleased to have Jane and Audrey here today, not only to see the projects that they have been involved in, you might say the what of the practice, but also to see how they do what they do, the sometimes unconventional means by which they do what they do, the how, as a way for us all to reconceptualize design and the relationship between designers, users, clients, and the built environment. Please welcome Jane and Audrey to the podium.
Hi, I'm Jane, and this is Audrey.
Hello.
You'll notice I have a London accent, and Audrey is...
I've got an Australian accent.
So I brought one back.
Good to be back.
We're both part of Assemble, and we're actually a kind of core group of 16 people in the office day to day, but we have a wider kind of group of about 20. And for us, this photo kind of encapsulates the sort of ideology behind our practice. It's called sort of based on the Amish barn raising kind of image of everyone getting around together collectively to kind of build things for the local community. And so whilst you've kind of been promised diagrams and speculation, we're not too big on those. What we're really big on is power tools, so you'll see a lot of that. And I'm going to quickly kind of run through a sort of set of projects just to give you a sort of flavour of the scope of what we do. And so one of our sort of core kind of interests is workshop space. Black Horse Workshop is a members' workshop. It's supposed to kind of have the notion of the sort of library, the swimming pool, the school as local amenities. And we think that workshops and kind of making and production should be part of the community. So we self-initiated, funded, and are board members for this project as an ongoing local resource. We do a lot of kind of local surveys and reports, small-scale structures that we fabricate in our studio, furniture, and we make a lot of products. We'll be talking about this project a bit later. We work often through models at kind of 1 to 10 or bigger, and this allows us to fabricate kind of even sort of facades for our own buildings. We do a lot of material experimentation, including this one for an exhibition on the architect Lina Babaji, where the kind of structure encasing the exhibition was made by taking everything out into a field and shooting it with a shotgun. This is a playground, a concrete playground reimagined in foam. And sort of small-scale structures. We often do a lot of material experimentation using what we find on site. So this is rubble. We also program our spaces, often as a way of investigating what the permanent use should be. So we did a program of events in an area called New Addington in South London, where there's this understanding that there's no community there. And what we did was a kind of residency that was a period of research to find out all of the things that were happening behind closed doors and bring them out into the street in order to then form the sort of capital works that were installed later. We've worked with artists on various projects and built our kind of own structures in public space. There's a performative element of what we do, so kind of theatre for Chichester that moved from the interior to the kind of exterior parkland, and a similar one which was about football in Southampton, where the whole exhibition, the whole stage was set around our notion that it was a football ground. It's kind of our unbuilt works, like this climbing wall on the outside of a sports centre. And so one of the themes that Audrey and I sort of discussed as a way of framing this talk was about the notion of visibility. And visibility for us is both a sort of product of having political agency to be seen and recognized, but by maybe sort of more formal institutions and the kind of industry to which we're sort of tangentially associated, the sort of architectural profession. But also visibility as a way of kind of antagonizing existing methods of practice, and a way of sort of demonstrating that something alternative can exist, even though maybe, as you'll see during the course of this presentation, it's not always perfect. And in a way, I'm going to sort of start by presenting maybe a sort of the informality of the way we work, the sort of very origins, which were kind of quite chaotic, where it was very much a kind of insular process of a group of people who were very much interested in making things and the experience of production. And so our first project was called the Cineroleum, which was the transformation of a petrol station, or gas station here. I don't know if you guys, petrol, thanks. This is why we have Audrey, she's my translator as well, into a cinema. And this was in 2010. And it was basically kind of designed and built entirely on site. We had no drawings. All we had was sort of production lines, acquired materials, which would sort of turn up, including a lot of scaffolding boards, and then repurposed into flip-up seating. Most stuff had to be kind of sort of invented. So this is a vacuum former that we sort of made on site to shape plastic tiles, which were then formed into new shapes and put back into the garage. And then a kind of evil puzzle of marquetry, which turned into seating in the kind of main foyer space. So the whole idea is to try and elevate these kind of quite crude materials, often industrial ones, which we kind of often got for free because a lot of companies were really keen that they had something else to put in their annual marketing report than, another reuse of Tyvek for a waterproof membrane in a building. They had a cool picture to sort of show. So they gave us 50-meter rolls of Tyvek, which we sewed and stitched, rigged on site in these sort of 12 panels, working with Flint's theatrical chandlers, who kind of came and showed us how to make this sort of huge curtain work. The idea being that it encased the petrol station, and at the end of the film, we would lift the curtain, and you would have been watching the film, but then you're sort of thrown back out onto the street and become the sort of spectacle. So tests happened on site, and the whole idea of the Cineroleum was to really kind of condense the idea of cinema going and the kind of heyday of the automobile industry as sort of these spaces that used to have a social purpose that are now kind of being lost in the city with the sort of closure of independent cinema and our derelict petrol station. So things like the sort of neon screen, the ruchedness of the curtain and the flip-up seats were sort of these signifiers of maybe the sort of nostalgia in a way for that era. And so this was a kind of interior space which had about kind of 120 people who came to see the films. And the idea really was that this would be a project that brought people to a building site. We were very visible as we were building over a kind of a month-long period, and kind of the idea that the knowledge would be democratized through showing and sharing how to use tools. You needed no specialist kind of knowledge, and make this a space that as kind of recent graduates working in industry were finding actually, going on construction sites, especially as 50% of our group women, trying to kind of push our sort of ability to work within these spaces from which we're kind of usually either excluded or find a lot of sort of opposition. And so the following year, we then worked on this project called Folly for a Flyover, which kind of took the same idea, like kind of core idea of building something on site and in public, but in a way trying to better understand what community meant in this kind of context. This is on the Olympic Fringe, so just outside of the main site, where just downstream from the canal, just like a whole series of security fences and CCTV. And so one of our moves here was to create a pontoon and boats so that you could go down the canal yourself and get probably closer than anyone else was allowed to at that point to this kind of space, which was supposed to be about regenerating this part of East London, yet was actually kind of creating barriers for most local people to use the space. And so the invention was to create a nail house. So these sort of buildings that the stubborn owner kind of refuses to move when someone comes in to build a road, and so they're forced to build it around them. So trying to create this sort of narrative as a way of creating a structure, which then had a cafe and another cinema and kind of poked up through the flyover. It's built with 12,000 bricks, wooden bricks that are all threaded, individually drilled and threaded through and then tied back to a scaffolding frame, recycled timber. These seats are all made of old church pews and broomsticks handles. You get a lot of really confused looks when you go to a hardware store and try and buy every broomstick that they have. It's not recommended. And even when it was in operation, it was still pretty much a building site. So this is sort of builder's sand, and you can see the bits of scaffold left over. But what was kind of amazing about this project and kind of revelatory is that the kind of structure itself was really important as a way of changing the perception of how this space could be inhabited. This was a place where most of the project for us was spent actually trying to find out who even owned it. Like, no one wanted responsibility for this kind of forgotten space. And after working out that Hackney Council were responsible, we were able to get licenses for it. But having the East London Brass Band kind of perform would have been sort of unthinkable. And it didn't necessitate having the Folly there at all, but the building itself completely changed kind of what was possible. And so this is one of my sort of favorite images from this project, is, this sort of like blonde girl, Sunday afternoon, best dressed, like out with her family, no adult obviously taking care of her really, but she's playing with sort of leftover building bricks on a kind of dirty surface outside of our structure. And so making this a permissive space for people to come to when the sort of story that had marginalised it as an area of leisure had kind of perpetuated in kind of a space, a kind of local space which was seeing a kind of lot of sort of top-down change. Cool. Handing over to you.
Thanks. I'm going to swap notes. Cool. So thanks, Jane, for that very comprehensive introduction. So Jane, I should say, for context, is a founding member and has been part of Assemble since day one. I am the newest recruit and the in-resident Australian. So Jane has talked through some of the formative projects, which we're still kind of quite well known for on a sort of global scale. And I guess we thought it would be good to talk through this project next, which was also a formative project, but is something that is a little bit more permanent, although it doesn't necessarily sort of fit the mould of a traditional built architectural project. It is designed and built and, in a way, permanent. And it's really quite a good example of our sort of ambitions and our mode of practice. Where possible, we really like to be able to maintain an ongoing relationship to projects. So this is a good example of that. So Baltic Street it's an organisation and it's a permanent space for children to play freely, which we set up in Glasgow. So it's just east of the city in Dalmarnock, which you maybe can't see from this photo, but it is a pretty sort of sparse, I want to say bleak landscape, for want of a better word. And there aren't necessarily a lot of places for kids to hang out there. So I guess for anyone who isn't familiar with the sort of idea of the adventure playground, at the heart of adventure play is this idea, sort of shared idea about trusting children and this sort of necessity for children to play freely and to give children the sort of space, time, support and resources to really be in charge and pursue their own play. So in the UK, in some places, this sort of a playground is really crucial where children don't have space to play, so they don't necessarily have the luxury of backyards like many of us do have here in Australia, and maybe they live in tower blocks and that sort of thing. So we felt this was a really sort of prime opportunity. So at Baltic Street, kids are really supported to self-organise, and the space is sort of constantly evolving based on sort of kids' needs, moment to moment, day to day, and more broadly, a sort of larger time scale. So it's about giving children a sort of sense of ownership over the built environment and something that they can sort of intervene in. And the playground's about sort of developing that within a sort of microcosm that sort of speaks to a larger sort of macro picture. And it is sort of this idea, it's a nice illustration, it's this idea of risk and that you only cut yourself once if you're sort of in charge of yourself. And you might be familiar with the adage, better a broken bone than a broken spirit, which was actually coined by Lady Marjorie Allen, who sort of popularised the adventure playground in the UK. So here you can see this was the playground in the beginning. So one of the first moves we did was just to clear this space, this piece of land that we had. And you can see, even without sort of any resources, kids are still having a great time. So yeah, in a sense, aside from all of that, it is also about making the children visible and sort of saying there are kids in this neighbourhood and there are kids who play here. So we opened up the space, we engaged play workers, who are people who are specially trained to support children in this way, without sort of intervening too much. We also had a provision for wet weather gear and boots and that sort of thing, and provisions for hot lunch. So that's where we started. And then it's really sort of evolved over time, with some design and various processes. So you can see this is a sort of evolution, sort of taking shape. And there is a bit of infrastructure. As I'm sure you know, it's pretty rainy and can be quite miserable in Glasgow, so you need some storage. So here you go. Not safe for work, maybe, but anyway, giving it a go. So basically, just to say as well that this project came out of a lead art commission for the Commonwealth Games in 2014. And for us, I mean, Andrew mentioned briefly about opportunism. Obviously, you know, we can talk about problematics around using sort of art money for something that we see as a sort of crucial social service. But yeah, it's this idea of opportunism and using these opportunities as sort of pilot or a precedent, sort of prompt and facilitate and establish organisations like these. And I guess as well, you know, that's a key model of our practice. And if a criticism of sort of most socially engaged practices is that, you know, within art and design, that projects don't maybe have a meaningful legacy or a sort of long-term impact, then our sort of ambition is to try to understand, like, what value we can bring and to be realistic about that, and at what stages that's appropriate. So when it's appropriate to deploy our skills, and then when it's appropriate to collaborate or engage with other people. And it's also about active collaboration, so a two-way street and something that's mutually beneficial. So yeah, it's really about using our resources and our networks to develop and establish structures. And I just have included a few photos. This is a recent trip that we made to the playground, a bunch of us from the office, which was fun. Probably a little bit too much fun for us as the adults, but we went and helped reorganise the shed, and we also built some stuff. So here's everyone having a grand old time, mixing some concrete, and flick through some fire, always good. Power tools. That's Karim, who often does our finances, so you know, everyone gets involved. And here we are, just building some tree houses. This is a nice structure we made. And that's us. No children in this photo, which is a bit dubious, but we stayed back late to finish off our handiwork. Yeah, but I guess just to say that it really is a sort of key example of how we try to maintain an ongoing role in things. So I guess, yeah, hopefully that brings us quite nicely along to Granby.
Okay. So yeah, kind of as Audrey mentioned, we establish quite a lot of projects with an ongoing kind of role, and often sort of subvert the initial brief which we're kind of given. And so this has ended up in us, what are we now, with 3 different companies: a design studio, a construction company, and a ceramics workshop. But we also sit on the board of Black Horse Workshop and the Adventure Playground, as they're both self-initiated projects. And so this is maybe one of our kind of most sort of the project we're most imbricated in terms of time and sort of physical endeavour. One member of Assemble has actually moved to Liverpool, to the area of Granby, which this illustration kind of shows the main 4 streets that make up the area, and lives there and manages the project kind of off-site from there. And so Granby Four Streets is a community land trust known as a CLT. I don't know if CLTs have made it to Australia or a part of the sort of culture of alternative housing models. But in the UK, community land trusts are where kind of a group of locals come together to form a trust, acquire land and build on it or develop the existing structures. And the important thing about a community land trust is this idea that the value of the land is separated from the value of the house. And so if the land is kept in ownership, in trust by the community in perpetuity, but the kind of thing that they build on top can be resold, can be rented, but is controlled by the trust. So the community land trust who approached us got a loan from a philanthropic investor and approached us to come and work with them to try and renovate 10 houses in the area which they had kind of acquired from the council for £1 each. And this is kind of a photo that is really indicative of what Granby looks like and still looks like today. It's an area of an area that has experienced managed decline over several decades since the kind of late 80s, early 90s, and a majority of the housing stock is kind of in this sort of state. It's a kind of new Labour move policy to try and move people out of the area and then kind of develop it, and for various reasons hasn't happened. And so this was kind of the typical type of dwelling that we inherited. But conversely, most of Granby is planted with all the local residents who have stayed, who have fought the battle to try and regenerate their local area, kind of realised that the way to argue for the fact that they kind of live there and are passionate about staying is to be visible through planting, through events, and through the market, which is a kind of weekly occurrence. And that's kind of been up until now their kind of form of resistance in the way about talking about how they want to live in the area. So our kind of move was to sort of gut the houses, but take advantage of where kind of things had kind of really gone to shit. So where in a bedroom where the sort of ceiling had kind of caved in, instead of just rebuilding a flat ceiling, we took advantage for the same surface area to create a pitched roof. And a lot of the work was done in kind by construction companies. So we had, I think, £19,000 per house to do the kind of whole thing. And at one stage, the company, they don't look at your drawings. This is why we don't do drawings. So they built a flat roof, and we had to get them kind of to take it down and say, like, no, the drawing shows it's a pitch. So it kind of felt like during the process, there's such limited resources, but also because we weren't, in this instance, building it ourselves, limited control over kind of what actually happened. So in that instance where the additional material and labour could have been spent elsewhere in the house, we were kind of forcing a contractor to kind of follow our designs, which was, in this instance, a move that we really felt would, change the quality of these buildings, which had such a history of investment from the local community. And I think for us this was kind of as well as Baltic Street, but getting so involved, you're really advocating for your client in this instance. And I think in so many cases we work for people who don't mean to be clients. These people just wanted to do up their own house, and then they're kind of having to do 10 and having to save them, and it's not just a bit of decorating. So we felt very strongly that we wanted to, as a practice, invest and find a way of encouraging a kind of added layer of what it means to make somewhere a home to the kind of very stripped back material palette that we're working with. So, for example, we used decals on just standard white tiles to kind of give a little bit more sort of personality. And this started off from what we called the enrichment program in Assemble, which was just kind of designing a whole load of products which we would put in the houses as this kind of additional layer. And a lot of them were made in the backyard of the buildings. We made mantelpieces from the rubble of the site, which were installed in each of the houses. And then again, where a kind of wall had come down, instead of rebuilding it, we wanted to adapt the houses to the local community, which, over the sort of 100 or so years since these houses were built as workers' houses, the community had become much more diverse. Liverpool is probably one of the mixed communities. It's got the largest black population in the UK and has a history of race riots. And there are a lot of families who live under kind of different cultures and ideas. So we wanted to build, so this is what we call a storage wall. I think we need to find a new name, it's not very sexy, but the idea that you could create more private spaces, but also create a more permeable, bigger space for kind of families or different kind of groups of people who want to live in different ways. This is the first resident moving into the house. And this led to our nomination for the Turner Prize, which is a fine art prize. Traditionally, and I think the nomination sort of came as a shock to us and to many other people, and it's kind of quite something to be sort of rejected by the architecture world and the art world. And so we decided to use the kind of money that they bestow on exhibitors to put on the exhibition. To found a workshop, Granby Workshop, which would then put our enrichment program into production. And so our exhibit for the Turner Prize was a showroom, which showed every single thing we could possibly think of to make. I was like polishing this concrete the night before we opened. And then we had a kind of newspaper that showed the sort of story of the area. And I think what we found about the Turner Prize, and I think the danger of the way maybe kind of we understood we were being kind of used by the Turner Prize to try and kind of make it more relevant or appealing to kind of its audience, but that maybe the sort of narrative around what we were doing actually only kind of further marginalized the community. They're kind of being celebrated for their marginality rather than, and kind of what they could achieve in this sort of moment of austerity and constraint. And so we wanted to kind of claim a wider space for an ambition for what the area could be. And so the workshop has actually since focused on ceramic products. But everything the workshop makes can be made in a kind of 2 up, 2 down house or on the street. So that's the barbecue, which you can just throw some slip cast plaster doorknobs in, and then they come out in this kind of smoky. This is not the best photo, is it? Smoky kind of effect. And so this was, you can see them in the bottom left. But this was a sort of kind of full range of what we did. And Audrey's going to talk you through where the workshop is today.
Cool. So this is the team that very lovingly developed all those products that you could see in the Turner Prize showroom, as we called it. So basically, as Jane has explained, we basically used the Turner Prize to launch the workshop. It was sort of something that existed in a way, but we used the prize to formalise it in a way and to launch it to the world. So as Jane also said, we've now sort of, with the workshop, progressed and refined the sort of output to mainly architectural ceramics. So this is the workshop. It is on Cairns Street, which is adjacent to the 10 terrace houses that we refurbished there. And the workshop employs at the moment, or the team at the workshop is a team of 7 people, most of whom are local to the area, some of whom who've been there their whole lives. Actually, one of them lives in one of the terraces. But we also have one member of Assemble who moved there to live there full time. So within Assemble, he very much just focuses on the project of Granby Workshop. So, as you can see here, this is the website. So this is a sort of like snapshot of some of the products we've got going. Yeah, it feels a little bit like an ad. Maybe it is. Fine. So sort of over time, we have worked with the workshop to develop new products. So you can see up the top there's splatware products. So we invested in a large hydraulic ram press for a project, and then put it to good use, moved it to the workshop. I think we actually had to build a new floor for it because it was so sort of immense. But anyway, so one of the recent projects was splatware. So it was ram pressing coloured clays together to create these plates and cups that sort of embrace this idea of chance, which is kind of quite integral to the workshop and to an extent to assemble practice as well. So I thought maybe in the first instance it might be good to show you a video that was made by the workshop. So I'm going to show you that in a sec. But this is just some images of sort of initial development of some of the ceramics products. So this is the pressed terracotta lampshade that you can see on the right there. And we've also got some sewing and block printing, and then, as Jane showed before, the smoke ceramics. So I'll show you the video. It was made by Samoya, who's one of the team there. So hopefully it works. I think I might need some help for it to be played, but we'll see. Great.
Splatware is a brand new range of colourful pattern tableware produced by Granby Workshop and Assemble. It's a process we've invented using an industrial ram press. We combine different colour clays together in a mould and squash them with a huge amount of force. Each product is unique. We're making cups and plates, the essentials for sharing food and drink. Granby Workshop is an architectural ceramic studio that grew out of the efforts to rebuild the Granby Four Streets in Liverpool after years full of empty houses. We designed new features for the houses being renovated. Tiles, fireplaces and handles, all made in Granby. The project received a lot of press attention after it won the Turner Prize in 2015. And that attention was used to launch the workshop to a wider audience, supporting the kinds of hands-on activity that brought about immense change in the area. We are not your usual manufacturer. We use experimental processes that introduce chance and playfulness to the production line, so every product is different. We smoke our handles in a barbecue, make fireplaces out of rubble, and are always experimenting with new techniques. Now, we're interested in how we can start to use industrial machinery alongside our handcrafted approach to push the limits of what we can create. This is our first range of tableware. We've tested and developed the process and made countless prototypes. We now need your help to start production. We want the workshop to continue to grow, both here in Granby and with a global reach. That's why we're launching Splatware on Kickstarter. Your support will launch this new range of products, developed and made in Granby. Each one will be made to order by us, for you, and they'll all be different. Nice one.
So the Kickstarter's closed. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to donate. But it's just sort of a sort of example of how we work and how we work with Granby Workshop. So they decided to use Kickstarter as a means of sort of securing pre-orders, which worked really well. So it funded an initial production run, but it's sort of one of the ways that we use our sort of like brand and our network as Assemble to sort of like push these types of things forward. So out of Splatware, we then developed another ram press product, which was the tiles that we showed at this year's Architecture Biennale. which are encaustic clay tiles. Hopefully, maybe some of you saw them. But I just thought I'd talk really, really briefly about this in terms of opportunism, as we said. So for this, we used the opportunity of the Biennale and also a commission from a client in Venice, VAC, to develop this new product. So it's something about the relationship between us and our subsidiaries, such as Granby Workshop being quite two-way. So it was a nice large commission for the workshop, and in a funny way it sort of functions as this sort of like subversive ad or trade show, kind of like the showroom at the Turner Prize, but also it was just a great opportunity for us to sort of retain some input into the design process of that product, and that's a real luxury. But of course, we rely on the expertise of the people there at the workshop, and also it's great to have someone that can produce for you. So that's the tiles, and then they are actually installed, if you can believe it, on a special mat, which means they can be decommissioned at the end, and they're going to be reinstalled in a salt marsh garden, which is also in Venice here, so you can keep a lookout for that one. But that brings us on to our next project, Sugar House.
So Sugar House Studios is, I suppose, it's our workshop. It's in Bermondsey in South London, and it's, although actually I'm going to show our old one first, right? Stratford. And so it's around this idea, which we call open studios, which is the idea of like lots of makers, all kind of doing their individual practices and running their own businesses, but in close proximity and with opportunities for shared resources. And I suppose this is a sort of image that sort of really encapsulates kind of what we kind of do, and our sort of internal hierarchy in terms of how we like to work. So a large proportion of our studio is given over to one big open space, with our wall of tools, which are kind of open access. So whilst they're owned by Assemble, anyone in the studio kind of can take from there, and this allows us to do things like make big scale models, but it's also a kind of main place where we kind of have lunch every day together, and what we ended up wanting to do with Sugar House was sort of extend it to a larger community. So the idea was, after doing the Cineralium and Folly, that we wanted to be able to continue making things, and we needed the resources to do so. But we also understood during the process of building those first projects that we weren't the best people to be building them. And that what we needed was a group of skilled people around us who we could work kind of closely with and often collaborate with. So we designed a second studio called Yard House, and this is Molly King, one of the tenants in our studios, who ended up making 1,200 tiles or something that went on the front of this building. And Yard House is a model for new build, affordable workspace in this kind of area, which we were based just off the Olympic site again as part of the London Legacy Development Corporation's kind of cultural offer. And we match funded this project with them to kind of demonstrate that affordable new build was kind of possible. And the idea being that the whole thing is a kind of timber frame. It's quite simple, built. So we collaborated with Workshop East, who are one of our anchor tenants at Sugar House, and they're a group of carpenters who graduated from the local crafts college, and as a group of people they needed a kind of affordable space where they could also house kind of a fair amount of equipment, and we had the space, we just didn't have the equipment, and so Yard House is really typical of a kind of collaboration we would do with people who we share a space with. And then it was kind of occupied by different artists. So it's a timber frame, Kingspan panels, which are structural and form the insulation, but then obviously kind of clad with this sort of front piece of these like bright tiles, which kind of create and form the sort of the yard space, which then became a site of parties and fun things. So we've got a real mix of makers who create much nicer things than we possibly can. Dan, and also a stonemason, who I don't think we have anymore, but big fixture in the last place. But also, I like to show this photo of the back of house. I think often we present our practice in a way that might seem quite like utopian, that everything's like really perfect, and actually most of the time it looks like this. So I think it's our first iteration of Sugar House was really a kind of organic experimentation in how we might want to kind of organise our practice to allow us to do different types of things. And we've since moved. It's a diagram. And Audrey's going to explain where we are now.
Yes, the one and only diagram, which actually Jane didn't want me to put in, but I put it in anyway. Jane's just talked through Sugar House 1.0. This is Sugar House 2.0, which is in Bermondsey. We had to move from the initial site because I believe it was redeveloped by the IKEA development arm. Yep. So instead, we've moved to the site of a former school, which is part of one site of a cluster of sites which are owned by the Duke of Westminster, so even better. And that is due to be redeveloped in the next sort of 5 to 10 years to be replaced by a large sort of developer-led housing scheme. So for those of you who don't know London, Bermondsey is kind of weirdly central. It's one stop from London Bridge on the Jubilee line. So a little bit more of a convenient location than what we previously had. But yeah, just like Sugar House Stratford, at Bermondsey, we're sort of the live-in landlords, if you want, the live-in studio space providers. And I think we sort of learned a lot from that, and it really sort of informed the way that we practice and sort of solidified for us what we need as a practice. So it allows us to work in a way where we are free to experiment, because as a sort of leaseholder and leasing out the other spaces, it allows us to sort of siphon off space for ourselves to work. So as you can see, we've got various tenants. So we brought a lot of the sort of initial community with us, but we've grown a little bit. So there were already music studios upstairs, so we brought in some musicians and record labels to fill those. But this is the site, so it was the school swimming pool, which we covered over, sadly, and also the school dance studio. So that was that then, and this is it now. This is Ying's studio. She's an artist. This is the new Workshop East mill. And this is our front of house space, which is very dear to us. You can see our forklift there, and all of our stuff, which we needed space for, obviously. I guess it's about, for one, Sugar House does generate a small income for us, which is useful in terms of the way that we work. But it also allows us to sort of foster this community. We try to provide affordable workspace around this idea of a core of shared facilities that support co-working, but also collaboration. So for us, it's just a real luxury, because a lot of our ongoing collaborators are our tenants and are right there at our doorstep. As Jane sort of alluded to, we have this front of house space, which we've used to, it's made a lot of projects possible, and it's allowed us to sort of work in a more ambitious and risky experimental way. So just briefly, that's our courtyard. Just briefly, this was a project we collaborated with the artist Matthew Raw to tile a kiosk at the entrance to Seven Sisters Station. So we didn't know a lot at that stage about producing tiles, and fortunately we had this space and a kiln in which we could work with Matthew. So we fabricated all those tiles on site, so it looks like this. And Then similarly, without front of house, we couldn't have experimented and then eventually fabricated the facade for Goldsmiths Centre for Contemporary Art, which is our sort of largest project that's been bubbling away from quite early on, and is due to be completed in September, which we're really excited about. So this is, you can see it in the background there, it's sort of a permanent fixture in front of house, a one-to-one mock-up. This is just some people doing a ceramics workshop with one of our tenants, Collective Matter. I think we've used up most of our time, but we're going to finish by just briefly talking through Goldsmiths, so I'm going to hand over to Jane for that.
So yeah, Goldsmiths, it's Goldsmiths University in South London. It's got an incredible fine art department. And it's actually situated in an old Victorian swimming pool. We seem to be into swimming pools. And so you can see the kind of iron water tanks, and they are, there's two, but the commission was to kind of turn this whole back of the studios into a new gallery space. And this was our first competition that we entered, first competition that we won. And I think it was a sort of naivety of not quite understanding how much, how the way that we were seen as, we were shortlisted as the wild cards, and we maybe kind of over-delivered on ambition, and so this was a model that we made for the competition, and the idea was to sort of really take advantage, it's a grade 2 listed building, take advantage of the existing spaces, carve them out to create maybe challenging space for display, but also kind of completely ignore the fact that the client told us they didn't mind and didn't want white cube gallery space, kind of knowing full well that's exactly what they wanted. So it's kind of carved out space, but then inserted 2 new tanks, which would kind of provide that sort of top lit white wall space for kind of the display of contemporary art, which is what that kind of space looked like, contrasted with this kind of space, which was a sort of carved out of the middle of the building, this sort of quite dark, double height space. It was quite fun at the competition stage. These competition model shots, and someone in the studio had to build replicas of Cyprien Gaillard's FS beer tower. It's both 1 to 20 and 1 to 10, I think. So that was nice. And so then we worked through models. So this is a much later stage as the design evolved, and you can kind of see the facade that goes into the swimming pool itself, the kind of big listed window, and then our kind of insertion of a new staircase which would lead up to the gallery tanks, kind of creating that visual connection between the students and the new space. And then we kind of scaled up. So this is the one-to-one test that we made of the facade. It's a corrugated cement board, a standard product. And we kind of built this mock-up to work out what sort of special bits we would need to kind of commission to make it work. And really, I don't know how Adam got away with this. He's the kind of project architect on this, but he decided that he was going to deliver the facade for our first ever public building. And because we have the sort of space to do that, it's a kind of classic example of sort of maybe overreaching a little bit on a project, but in a way kind of making it our own. And that has extended to working with Granby Workshop to commission a whole series of products. So they're helping us out with slip-cast lampshades. We're doing chairs. I think there's some doorknobs going in. And so this is it on site most recently. Well, actually quite a long time ago now because it's finishing next month. But you can kind of see the spaces sort of really taking shape. And so for us, this is obviously a step up in scale. It's a very different procurement and delivery process than we usually we're actually more comfortable in the sort of non-traditional way of delivering projects. And I mean, I suppose we haven't really mentioned it, but none of us are qualified architects. We have 3 people who are doing their qualification right now, but actually most of us have been involved in a number of practices that haven't really led to the kind of obvious scenario where any of us would actually like hold a professional title. So Goldsmiths has been kind of really interesting project in that sense. You know, how the question almost for us is how do we retain what makes what we do interesting and the agency we have to experiment and take risks, but also kind of work within the constraints and be recognized by clients who obviously invest a lot in us and the kind of professional standards which are required of delivering a kind of facade for a public building. So this is kind of this eerie moment where all of the like photos of the interior of what we built looked just like our models, and we realised we're not very good at design development. Yeah, so I hope we've given you a kind of whirlwind introduction to what we do and how we do it. Thank you very much.
Thanks.